Vesuvius is one of the world's most dangerous volcanoes. Just 6 miles from the bustling city of Naples, this restless giant could kill millions in a fraction of a second. The question is, when? Nearby lay the ruinous cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum. They are haunting reminders of the volcano's past and potential wrath. Now, scientists are furiously trying to predict what this sleeping monster will do next, before it's too late. They'll use ancient artifacts and startling new scientific evidence to unravel the secrets of Vesuvius. No volcano is more closely monitored than Vesuvius, with good reason.
One of the most important things that people should understand about Vesuvius is that it's alive. It's a volcano, and we have no control over it. The power of nature is unmatchable.
Vesuvius has erupted hundreds of times, with catastrophic consequences. The most infamous is the eruption in 79 AD. It annihilates thousands of people at Pompeii and Herculaneum in the blink of an eye. And it could do the same thing again.
We can be pretty sure that Vesuvius is going to erupt again, and the best predictor of future behavior is always past behavior. And roughly every 2,000 years, give or take 200 years or so, we end up with a giant rocket engine aimed up at the sky and the surge clouds.
And today, the stakes have never been higher. Scientists used to think the city of Naples would be out of harm's way when Vesuvius reawakens. But recently discovered evidence from a Bronze Age eruption nearly 4,000 years ago is forcing scientists to reconsider.
The Bronze Age eruption impacted mostly the area west of Vesuvius, which includes Naples.
The people who live in Naples think they're safe because they know that the last time there was an enormous eruption, it was Pompeii to the south that was hit. There is no reason at all that it should erupt towards the south. It could erupt straight towards the heart of Naples.
If the eruption happens in the near future, researchers fear the area won't be prepared for such a catastrophe.
The official advice is people should be moving away from this area to have fewer victims when the trouble comes, and some sort of trouble is bound to come. But people won't, and the population is actually increasing. And buildings, houses are getting closer to the crater of Vesuvius, not further away. And the problems of evacuation are enormous.
Now, scientists are trying to determine when this volcano will reawaken.
Vesuvius stands there as a wonderful visible symbol of, you know, we've got this enormous pistol pointed at your heads.
Experts wonder if they will detect warning signs early enough to get people out of harm's way. If they don't, Naples could be the next Pompeii. Large-scale eruptions of Vesuvius are called Plinian eruptions. They can kill thousands of people in a fraction of a second by unleashing what's known as a pyroclastic flow, or surge.
Eventually, the hot column of air above the volcano can't hold up the weight of all of this ash and rock and cinder in the sky anymore, and at that point, it all collapses downward. And it's essentially like an avalanche dropping out of the sky from several miles up. Except it's not an avalanche of snow, it's an avalanche of cinders and rocks that may have a temperature of more than 1,000 degrees, and they may be moving hundreds of miles an hour. Someone who had the misfortune to be near a pyroclastic flow and in its path would scarcely have a moment to even know that it was coming before he or she was killed.
The World Trade Center, the combined force of the Twin Towers falling was 1.6 kilotons. and the surge clouds going out from them were a force that is less than 1/10,000 of what Vesuvius did in AD 79.
There are often thousands of years between Vesuvius's Plinian eruptions. But that doesn't mean the volcano remains quiet. Smaller, or what scientists call sub-Plinian eruptions, have occurred 6 times in the last 500 years.
The difference between a Plinian volcanic eruption and a subplinian one is really just a matter of scale. Plinian eruptions throw essentially a mountain's worth of material up into the sky, and they may be raining a gigantic amount of material over the landscape for many, many, many miles. Subpliny events are essentially the same, just scaled way down.
Sub-Plinian eruptions may not be as explosive, but they are still deadly. The most recent occurred during World War II.
The 1944 eruption of Vesuvius was small potatoes compared to the one that destroyed Pompeii. Still, it was a dangerous explosion in its own right. It dropped enough cinder and rock over the landscape that it killed 26 people who were trapped inside structures that collapsed.
The latest statistics suggest that the next eruption will be at least sub-Plinian.
The probability to have a big eruption in what we call subplinian is very high, it's 90%.
Now, the race is on to determine when that catastrophe will occur.
The prediction of Vesuvius is a very complicated business. It's impossible to predict much in advance the eruption of any volcano.
Scientists must hunt for clues hidden in the volcano's past to determine its future. August 24th, 79 AD, southern Italy. The usually peaceful Mount Vesuvius begins to violently erupt. A column of rock, smoke, and gas blasts into the air. The column stretches 20 miles high and rains dense, heavy debris over the area, including the Roman cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum.
Pompeii and Herculaneum were part of a really quite thriving set of agricultural communities that were around Vesuvius. When the eruption in 79 AD happened, the people wouldn't have known what to think. Remember, the Romans didn't even have a word for what a volcano was.
Local residents have no idea the mountain in their backyard is a ticking time bomb. And the warning signs, including a powerful earthquake in 62 AD, went unheeded.
People really had no idea what was happening. There are loads and loads of signs of trouble coming up. They couldn't read them. They continued life as normal. The biggest sign that they missed was the earthquake of about 17 years earlier. Of course, they continued rebuilding, mending the cracks in the walls, propping things up, redecorating, carrying on with life. So it's quite evident they had no conception of what was going to hit them. They had no idea that that earthquake was part of a long-term process.
Scientists believe that the 79 eruption can provide vital clues to what Vesuvius will do next. Seismologist Marcello Martini is the director of the Vesuvius Observatory. He and his team carry the heavy burden of monitoring Vesuvius 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Vesuvius is the most monitored because this is the most dangerous volcano, not because of the activity of Vesuvius itself, but the larger number of people that surround the Vesuvius.
If dramatic changes at the crater appear on their screens, they are the first line of defense.
Here we have a direct line with the civil protection, so we have people 24 hours a day just to monitor that everything is okay and there are no signal from the Vesuvius.
100 monitoring stations are strategically placed around the volcano and throughout the region. They collect and transmit data in real time.
This includes a thermal camera, which gives us information about the temperature inside the crater. And then there are other sensors out there which collect gases That antenna over there transmitted information directly to the Vesuvius Observatory in Naples, about 10 miles far from here.
As data streams in, researchers watch for precursors such as temperature or gas changes in the crater. But they also know that earthquakes are often another early warning sign. And a sudden increase in seismic activity could mean the magma beneath the ground is moving upward.
Yeah, we have some seismic monitor systems. Those are related to the network that is around the Vesuvius. And what we get here is the signal related to the ground shaking.
The most recent data shows that Vesuvius is very much alive.
This, for example, is an earthquake that occurred today. And this is very small, not felt for people. We have around 200 or more events of this kind per year.
Their challenge is to interpret the seismic activity. Some movement could signal an impending eruption, but other movement could just be routine shifting of the ground.
Some of the indicators of the magma is coming toward the surface is seismic activity. We have the magma coming up, they create a lot of fractures are opening, so you have earthquakes. This is an indicator, so something is moving, but what if the magma stops? Then you don't have an eruption there.
Martini believes that the time to worry is when earthquakes start happening in swarms, or sequences of several earthquakes taking place in a short period of time.
The most recent is a little swarm here. It was a little more than 1 week ago. And we recorded about 50 events in a few hours.
If an eruption is coming, swarms may also be accompanied by other precursors, such as gas composition changes or ground swelling near the mountain.
Not one indicator will tell you that it's going to happen for sure.
So scientists must search for other warning signs that Vesuvius has unleashed in the past, in an attempt to protect themselves from the future. The seismic activity leading up to Vesuvius's 79 AD eruption wasn't the only missed clue of potential danger. In fact, evidence of previous eruptions surrounded the area. The very material used to construct and mend buildings was remnants of past destruction.
Virtually every bit of stone you see out of which they make their houses is precisely the product of a previous eruption. If we look around ourselves, that you can see some sort of yellow stuff, and that is the tufa, which is produced by the ash from an eruption that compacts.
But people had no idea that Vesuvius could produce this material. And when warning signs of the impending eruption started plaguing the area, they went unrecognized.
What we're now discovering is that there were other signs of which the earthquake was only a fragment.
Andrew Wallace Hadrill has been excavating the ancient cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum for more than a decade. He believes newly uncovered evidence of ground swelling at Herculaneum before the 79 AD eruption could be a critical clue to what will happen in the future.
The whole earth around the Bay of Naples was bobbing up and down as there are movements in the magma chamber. It heaves up and down by this process which the scientists call bradycism, which is the Greek for slow earthquake, slow shaking. And so over a matter of decades, you don't perceive it as a movement of the earth, you perceive it as a movement of the sea. The sea suddenly seems to be coming up and then going away. And this over many years.
Wallace Hadrill and a team of scientists have discovered that dramatic changes took place at the shoreline before the 79 AD eruption. The land moved up and down by as much as 15 feet over the course of 50 years, a result of the growing magma chamber pushing up on the land and causing the sea to retreat. Then the land would retract and the seawater would come in, creating a new shoreline.
Sometimes the land will go up 10, 20 feet in the course of a couple weeks or a couple months and back down again. This is caused by changes in pressure on the magma beneath the volcano. Pressure goes up and the land goes up. Pressure goes down, the land goes down.
Around here, you can see pretty much the whole sequence. The sea is out, and they build their foundations on top of a beach. And you're seeing this sea sand cut underneath it all the way around here. And then you can see signs of the sea coming back in again. Look at the edge there. Do you see how it's all eroded? The sea has been breaking against it, and it's actually been coming pretty much up to this level. So that's pretty dramatic evidence that at some point, a very late point, the sea is splashing over our feet here. But at the earliest point, the sea's got to be way, way back.
Today's shoreline is several hundred feet from the ancient city. But 2,000 years ago, the water reached the base of these buildings at Herculaneum. Around the corner, even more evidence of the significant ground swelling becomes apparent.
We're in an area here which we've only excavated in the last few days. And we've been excavating this great big wall, great thick wall, which is designed precisely to hold the seawater back. And you can see that the ground level, at the time they built the wall, was right up here. And you see the way it corresponds to those arches there? It corresponds to ground floor level. Except under that level, there is another floor, which we discovered by digging down, another set of arches. And what we discovered that when this great tower of a building was built, the sea was much lower, and they could have another level down there. The level which we've reached in excavation now, you can see we haven't reached the beach yet. We probably need to go down half a metre, maybe as much as a metre, to find the original beach level.
This dramatic movement shows that the magma chamber was continually active, ready to wreak havoc on the area.
Right down beneath us, 2 kilometers and more, there's the magma chamber, and it's pushing upwards and heating the material, the fluids in the surface above. And then there are moments when it goes down and pushing it up, and it's gone down again, and the sea is swirling around, and then finally you get your eruption.
Today, scientists apply this new discovery to their own monitoring of Vesuvius. A similar change in land level would be a major signal that something is about to happen.
If you're around this area and you notice that the ground level is changing dramatically and the sea is coming in, you would be well advised to get out rather rapidly.
If scientists can understand the conditions just before past eruptions, they'll be better prepared for the inevitable. So today, volcanologist Giuseppe Mastrolorenzo is climbing to Vesuvius's crater to collect rock samples for analysis.
This is very important in order to investigate the conditions in magma chamber just before the eruptions.
Within these rocks are tiny crystals invisible to the naked eye. They contain gases that may help determine the sequence of events before Vesuvius erupts.
Sequence of studies in the laboratory can give us information also about the timing of magma rising from the magma chamber to the surface.
If he is successful, this information can help decipher how much time people will have to escape once the eruption begins. It could be a critical clue for area residents who hope to avoid the grim reality of the volcano's past fury. When the Vesuvius eruption of 79 AD begins, chaos ensues. People rush to locate family, gather their belongings, and figure out the safest place to hide.
People realized that this was very bad. A lot of people, probably most people, did begin evacuating very quickly. It's like any cross-section of people. Some will say, hey, this is bad, it's scary, it's big, I want to get out of here. Others will go into this nesting urge and denial.
People would naturally have been trying to figure out how they could get to safety. But where do they go? Do they run away? Where do they run to? It seems to be everywhere. So naturally, a lot of the people of these cities would think to try to gather up whatever family members or animals that they could, and they would try to go indoors to hide inside their homes.
But those who do not immediately evacuate face a terrifying end. As the minutes tick by, more and more ash and rock pile up on the ground.
Unfortunately, as the eruption would proceed, the gigantic amounts of cinder and ash would be piling up on top of their homes, and it was only a matter of a few hours before many of these structures started to collapse.
Outside, those who do try to escape scramble to stay above feet of debris. But their efforts are in vain. Things get much worse. On August 25th, the column of ash that's been spewing rock and gas for more than 12 hours becomes too heavy in the air to support itself and simply collapses. It forms an avalanche of scorching gas, rock, and ash called a pyroclastic flow, or surge. At Pompeii, many victims likely suffocate for several minutes before being killed by the flow. But over at Herculaneum, 8 miles away, residents face an even more terrifying fate. The pyroclastic surges barrel through the ancient city at even higher temperatures.
This is a point at which you can get a very clear idea of the sheer scale of the eruption. This is all solidified pyroclastic flow, and most of it is just what comes out of Vesuvius. But as you come down to the level at which we're standing, you find more and more bits of building material. There's a bit of a tile, a bit of a brick, then you see a bit of wood. And if you come over here, here's more tiles, here's a lovely great beam, and here is a column. This is the base of a column. You can see it disappearing downwards, and it's almost pointing back to where it comes from. It must have been part of a colonnade up at the top there. So it shows how the flow has brought down from the city. It's scraped off a whole layer of the city and just chucked it down here. Here's a beam, there's a column, whoomph, down towards the sea.
When the first flow came down through Herculaneum, every living thing in the city died, all the way down to bacteria and viruses. One of the great paradoxes is that the hotter the cloud was, it preserved everything. So we find Herculaneum much better preserved than Pompeii, where the temperatures were a bit less. It's amazing. We actually find a city that was flash frozen in time.
Along the ancient shoreline, volcanologist Giuseppe Mastrolorenzo and anthropologist Pier Paolo Petrone excavate the boathouses. They're finding hundreds of victims from the 79 AD eruption.
In several years of research, we have tried to understand how the people died. So, which was the effect of pyroclastic surge on the people and object in order to define scenarios.
This is a young woman. She got just a fetus inside the pelvis, huh? So it was just a pregnant woman, yeah? So the women are what age, about 16, 17 maybe?
Maybe a little bit more, maybe 18.
With no place else to go, residents gather in these cavernous structures along the shore.
People looked for a place of safety, and it's clear that we find all the skeletons in a place that would be very safe in most normal circumstances, under well-built concrete arches. They are actually very good bomb shelters. You and I would take refuge there.
But when the pyroclastic flow comes through, nothing can protect them.
It's very much like a scene from the London Underground during bombing in the Second World War. They're desperately taking refuge together.
These human remains from 79 AD provide scientists with critical clues about the power of the pyroclastic flow.
We are in the waterfront area of Herculaneum, and here there are the 12 waterfront chambers with one of the most dramatic evidence of the tragedy occurred during the 79 AD eruption of Vesuvius. Ciao Pierpaolo.
Buongiorno, come stai?
Tutto bene. All these chambers were filled by the first pyroclastic surge, which was very hot and caused the death of at least 300 people, which were recovered in these chambers.
Actually, no one of them is showing a kind of voluntary reaction. So we think they died instantly due to the very hot surge. But we have some more details just watching the skeletons, not only the position of the skeletons, so they are just frozen in the instant of the death, but also in details on the skulls, for instance. So Giuseppe, you see here we have, there's a skull which is blackened inside with some evident fractures just on the edges here of the skull, which testify the very high temperature. So very probably these skulls exploded due to the very high heat of the surge.
This evidence of such a violent and rapid death is a terrifying warning to residents living near the crater.
The evidence from Herculaneum are very important in terms of volcanic risk evaluation.
These people were exposed to a temperature exceeding 500 degrees centigrade. So these victims testify something very important, that at this distance from the volcano, there is no possibility to survive, even if the people is sheltering inside buildings.
The only way to save the people in case of an eruption is a complete evacuation of an area as wide as 20 kilometers from the volcano, because we cannot make provision about the type of eruption or the distance at which thermal, mechanical, and other dangerous effects will be observed.
If residents don't heed scientists' warnings, they could face the same fate as their ancestors from Herculaneum.
They died in mid-sentence and in mid-swallow of food in about 1/200th of a second, faster than a person could even flinch. All the water in the flesh instantly vaporized and jetted out of the body, including the blood boiling in the brain with enough force to crack the skulls wide open. And then this steam cooled the ash and the air, and it instantly imploded over the bones, preserving the bones in exactly those positions that they had been in.
You can see.
The resurfacing of these 2,000-year-old skeletons is a chilling testament to what can happen when the next big eruption comes. But evidence from an even earlier eruption is about to raise the stakes even higher. When Vesuvius erupts in August of 79 AD, it annihilates the cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum, killing thousands of people in the blink of an eye. And it buries the region in as much as 70 feet of debris. But the 79 AD eruption isn't the only major or Plinian eruption Vesuvius has unleashed. Recent discoveries from a Bronze Age eruption nearly 4,000 years ago are forcing scientists to reconsider Vesuvius's danger.
Obviously, ever since the discovery of Pompeii, people had known that Vesuvius could be a very serious volcano, but the full magnitude of just how bad it could be only really became clear in recent years.
Volcanologist Giuseppe Mastrolorenzo and anthropologist Pier Paolo Petrone found two skeletons in the town of San Paolo Bel Sito, about 10 miles northeast of the volcano. These skeletons were unlike anything they'd ever found before.
The two victims were a young woman of about 19 years old, as testified from the morphology of the pelvis and skull, and a male of about 45 years old.
Excavating skeletons is nothing new for local scientists. They've uncovered hundreds of skeletons from Pompeii and Herculaneum over the years. But upon examination, Mastrolorenzo and Petrone realized these skeletons were unique. They weren't from 79 AD. They were from 1780 BC.
This is the skeleton of one of the two victims, a young woman. She's just laying on one side with both hands on her faces.
Well, these people were very unlucky because they were just in the focus of the first phase of the eruption. So they were covered by about 1 meter of pumice.
Scientists knew this eruption, called the Avellino eruption, had occurred, but they had never found evidence of its impact on the civilization at that time. And the story these skeletons tell is even more terrifying than the one told by the victims of 79 AD.
The two human victims, they had no time to escape. So they just died by suffocation at the very beginning of the eruption.
Petrone and Mastro Lorenzo spend a decade searching for other clues from this eruption. Slowly, the evidence of a prehistoric population comes to the surface.
About 15 kilometers far from Vesuvius, was found a complete prehistoric Bronze Age village, just abandoned from people, leaving everything inside huts, even animals. Then, 3 years ago, were found thousands footprints of people fleeing away during the eruption, and a mass accident of about some 10,000 of people.
Many people escape to safety, but the eruption devastates the land.
In the excavation of these last years, a couple of discoveries show that some people try to rebuild some huts, but due to environmental degradation, reoccupation was impossible, at least for a period of 2 centuries, as far as 70 kilometers from Vesuvius.
But what's even more astounding is the location of the devastated village. It sat within what's now the metropolitan area of Naples, an area previously thought to be safe from the wrath of Vesuvius.
After the discovery of these remains, it was very clear that Vesuvius actually could produce an eruption big enough to reach out far enough to even extend to Naples itself, which meant that the volcano was potentially much more destructive today than we ever would have thought.
Today, 3 million people occupy the greater Naples area. If another eruption like the Bronze Age eruption occurs, they could face unimaginable danger.
The Avellino eruption should be considered as a worst-case scenario for a future eruption.
If Vesuvius were to erupt very significantly, it would be an extraordinary disaster with potentially millions of people at risk. At a bare minimum, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people being left homeless. Probably the disruption of the entire Italian economy, which means the 7th largest economy in the world would suddenly be struck down. And of course, rippling effects that would reach out through the rest of Europe.
Modern construction projects have buried much of the prehistoric evidence. But what has been uncovered gives scientists a clearer picture of the potential consequences should the next big eruption resemble this Bronze Age eruption.
And a catastrophic event like the Avellino one should cause total devastation, at least within the 10 kilometers far from the volcano. So we know that the impact force of the surges is strong enough to let buildings to collapse. All the population will die, even within a large part of the Napolitan area.
Back at the Vesuvius Observatory, Mastro Lorenzo analyzes the samples of volcanic rock he collected from the crater. They will help determine the timeline of events just before an eruption.
This is a thin section of the rock we talked yesterday. This is a very thin section of a pumice.
He and his colleague Lucia Papalardo use a microscope and digital camera to transmit images to their computer.
She's taking a photograph of a thin section of a pumice erupted in 79 AD eruption, in the very early phase of that eruption. The photographs show us many evidences about the crystals and the texture of the rocks.
Within the rocks are tiny crystals filled with volcanic gases. These crystals are essential to determining how quickly the magma rises from the chamber to the surface. The key is the frequency of small crystals. If there are a few small crystals, it could mean that once the eruption begins, there will be very little time to react.
Well, these pictures are really surprising because we see that there are very few small crystals, and these indicate that the processes of magma rising from the magma chamber to the surface was incredibly fast.
The fast ascent of magma means that people could have less than 1 hour to escape once the magma starts rising, and Naples could be in the path of destruction. Now, scientists and civil protection officials must confront a scenario in which millions of people could be annihilated in a fraction of a second. Although scientists can't say when the next eruption of Vesuvius will occur, they can say with some certainty that it will be destructive.
This indicated that the magma rising was very fast.
Volcanologist Giuseppe Mastrolorenzo believes the current magma chamber is comparable in size to what it was just before the last two major eruptions.
Some thin sections indicated that gas was trapped at a depth of about 8 kilometers. This depth is exactly the depth of the magma chamber revealed by the seismic tomography.
There's currently enough magma to produce possibly hundreds of major eruptions in the future.
If you go to Vesuvius today and stand on the crater rim, you see steam coming up. That's an indication that there's still heat under the ground. There is magma there, tens of cubic kilometers of magma, and there'll come a time when that magma comes to the surface of the Earth.
With the magma beneath the crater constantly building, Naples and the surrounding towns must prepare. The worst-case scenario would send pyroclastic flows barreling through the region. Anyone still in the area wouldn't stand a chance.
They don't even have time to think about it if they encounter a pyroclastic flow. It comes so fast, and what the scientists have shown is that the heat just comes straight over them, and their limbs instantly retract into this pugilist position. No brain processes needed. You go, and you've gone.
You do not want to be anywhere near, in, or around Naples if a surge cloud is coming toward you. You can't outrun it. It is coming at you at 200 miles an hour.
And millions of people attempting to flee the area could create chaos in a matter of hours.
I think the problems of evacuation, as the authorities are well aware, are absolutely gigantic. Can people physically get out of the area without all the roads being blocked? Anyone who's traveled around this area knows that the roads are permanently blocked. You have a build-up of traffic for a mile. What would happen in an eruption?
Civil protection officers must confront the question of how to prepare for the inevitability.
We are dealing with the most dangerous volcano in the world. We know that since the beginning of the first symptoms till the eruption, there should be at least 1 week time span. In Italy, we can manage, in case of emergency, all the different institutions. Everybody has on the table their instruction. In case of an emergency situation, we are very confident that within 3-4 days we can evacuate all those have to be evacuated.
But some scientists have their doubts.
We have 3 million people so living all around the area, from the small towns just around the Vesuvius, including the city of Naples. How do we move all these people away? With a highly densely populated area with small roads, there is no way to move these people.
The evacuation strategy is designed for a subplinian eruption, one considerably smaller than those unleashed in 1780 BC and 79 AD. But there is no way to know how big the next explosion will be.
The present emergency plan is based on a subplinian eruption, which needs just 600,000 people must be evacuated, not 3 million people. The difference could be the major cause of the tragedy.
What happens in New Orleans with Katrina. The human chaos caused by natural catastrophe is absolutely daunting, and up to this point, no government we know is capable of dealing with them. But we need to get smarter if we're going to rescue people.
As the world witnessed with the 2009 earthquake a few hours north of Naples, natural disasters can decimate an area in just seconds.
The earthquake in Italy is unfortunately probably kind of a preview of what we might expect in the event of a serious volcanic eruption at Vesuvius again in the future. Remember, it's very likely that there would be earthquakes of some severity that might actually be leading up to the volcanic eruption itself. So we would see all that kind of earthquake type of damage then capped off by even more destruction caused by the eruption itself, with the attendant loss of homes, loss of lives. It would be a scale of disaster in Europe that I don't know that we've ever really seen before.
Italian authorities have designated 18 towns around Vesuvius as red zone, or high-risk areas. If the volcano shows signs of unrest, they will focus their evacuation efforts on these places. But Naples isn't located within the red zone area. Red zones are drawn along municipal boundaries. Critics contend Naples must be included in the evacuation strategy. When the pyroclastic flow comes, they argue, it won't stop simply because it's reached the border of a town.
In some areas, the red zone is 7 kilometers from the Vesuvius. In some other areas, it's 12 kilometers. They should have drawn a circumference around the Vesuvius at a distance 11 kilometers.
Despite the inherent danger, more and more people move to the area. Construction along the slopes of the mountain and around the edges of the red zone continues, seemingly undeterred.
One of the biggest problems, the largest civil hospital of southern Italy, which is located at 7 kilometers from the Vesuvius center, the so-called Ospedale del Mare, the Sea Hospital.
The hospital sits just 4 miles from the mountain's crater, but it's not within the red zone area. Authorities defend their decision.
L'Ospedale del Mare, which is under construction on the eastern part of Naples and is outside the red area, and is the only hospital which is under construction, which is built following all the instructions and the criteria to build an hospital within a seismic area.
But not everyone agrees.
I mean, to put a sea hospital in an area which is in a risk area is a criminal decision for the future generation.
Even efforts to pay families to move out of the red zone have been unsuccessful.
It's rather sweet that the government offers people something like 30,000 euros to move out of their houses. Of course, this is completely out of sync with the value of property in this area. Real estate is very valuable, and offering people 30,000 is absolutely not enough to get them to budge.
But an even greater problem may be the potential false alarms that could occur before the real eruption begins. Some fear residents will become resistant to evacuation.
There will be false alarms. Probably the first time that people are told you need to get ready to evacuate because we're building up toward a major eruption. The volcano will rumble, there'll be some earthquakes, maybe some destruction of property, and then nothing happens. Similar to what happened where you had an earthquake in AD 62 that did a lot of damage to Pompeii and Herculaneum. They reconstructed. You had earthquakes in the months leading up to the big eruption, although they didn't really know what was coming. But if that happened today, we'd have a few earthquakes, false alarms, people get used to patching up their houses, and they may stop listening to the volcanologists.
This is one of our problems, the so-called false positive. I mean that you evacuate the area and then nothing happens. You may be successful in evacuating even 500,000 people, even in 4 or 5 days. But then if nothing happens, they will start spontaneously to getting back at home.
Despite the scientific community's warnings, area residents seem undaunted by the potential danger. They are deeply rooted in the neighborhoods where they've lived for generations.
So Neapolitans have a very, let's say, fatalistic attitude toward what's going to happen in the future. They know rationally, but they don't understand it emotionally, really.
Instead, Neapolitans live with a force of nature they cannot control.
Vesuvius is a symbol of how nature is actually something still bigger than us. Humans have kind of got the idea into their heads that they can occupy the Earth wherever they want. The government can solve problems. Vesuvius is not a problem that can be solved. It's not going to go away. It will erupt sooner or later.
While the world wonders when that day will come, scientists obsessively monitor the volcano. They know that preventing an eruption is not an option. Instead, the best they can do is hope to detect it before it's too late.